Welcome to the Wake Up Protocol. I am your host, Nadia Haldeman, and together we're having life-changing conversations with real people about spiritual awakening and the transformations that follow. We're mapping the messy path of awakening so you can go further faster and feel a little less alone along the way. For this week's episode of the Wake Up Protocol, I'm sitting down with Xanna Seto. The multipassionate Xanna is the steward of Serpent Song Sanctuary, a retreat center on an island in the heart of the Salish Sea. She's also a musician and a singer, and she's fluent in several modern and ancient languages. Xanna has traversed a life path that most of us can't even imagine. She joins me today to share a story of incredible resilience, moving from the deepest shadows of addiction and life on the streets to the radiant clarity of a deeply lived spiritual vocation. Xanna's journey is a masterclass in the courage it takes to be truly vulnerable. She opens up about her times as a 14-year-old runaway with a national biker group, her years in the grip of hard drugs, and the divine intervention that eventually led her back to the light through true love, the study of Sanskrit, and the healing power of sound. We talk about music as an ancient technology, the power of reclaiming your gifts after being told they were wrong, and what it means to finally stop being attached to being right so you can start being real. Xanna reminds us that our most difficult chapters are often the soil for our greatest transformations. We talk about music as an ancient technology, the power of reclaiming your gifts after being told they were wrong, and what it really means to finally stop being attached to being right so you can start being real. Xanna reminds us that our most difficult chapters are often the soil for our greatest transformations. This is a conversation for anyone who needs to be reminded that no matter how far you've wandered into the shadows, your light is never truly lost. It's an invitation to trust that every twist in your path, no matter how painful, is actually leading you home.
I started getting passed around from relative to relative because they were fed up to hear. And as soon as I was ready to graduate 10th grade, they put me on house arrest, locked the phone. I was not allowed anywhere outside of the house after school for the last couple of months. And the day after I graduated, I was put on a plane back to the States. So I get on the plane. I'm supposed to land in Miami, take a connecting flight to Orlando. And as soon as I land in Miami, I switched my ticket out for a bus ticket. My parents are waiting at the gate in Orlando for me to get off the plane. I never appeared. Instead, I called the bikers, told them I was coming back, headed up on the bus to Orlando. And somebody asked me something on the bus ride that I'll never forget. They asked me what I plan to do with my life. And I said something very prophetic. I said, you know what? I'm going to live my life from the gutter to the glitter, and then I'm going to decide where I want to be. And oh boy, like I said, be careful of the words that you speak because I called that in.
Xanna Seto, welcome to the Wake Up Protocol.
Hi, Nadia.
It's such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. We have had many beautiful spiritual experiences together over the years, and I'm just really excited to have you share your journey because it has so much depth and so many difficult moments, and yet somehow you continuously manage to get yourself back into that beautiful light and then allow that light to radiate to touch all these other humans and help them grow too on their journey. So you're a steward of a retreat center, and you are a space holder and a seeker. And maybe to start with, I would like for you to just tell our audience who you are and what it is that you do right now.
That's a big question. I do whatever my path opens to in this moment. I'm trying to live my life day to day in a way that creates opportunity and always invites curiosity. I steward a beautiful 5-acre sanctuary called Serpent Song. And I'm just in love with this avocation. that actually kind of just fell into my path. Again, another way that I was open to something that I was not expecting. And it has brought so much beauty into my life.
Mm-hmm.
I am a student of ancient wisdom traditions, initiated into Sri Tantra, initiated into the Pako path of Hatun Keros. I have studied Sanskrit. I'm currently studying Quechua, and I'm always looking for that kernel of truth and those things that are going to resonate with me, help guide me on my path, and perhaps give me some tools to be able to offer to others to inspire them along their way as well.
So beautiful, the things you're doing. And you're such a multi-talented linguist, if that's the right word. You speak so many languages. And I remember I've seen you at gatherings. I've seen you sing with the harmonium. We've danced together. But the first time we talked was at a gathering, and you spoke German to me without an accent. And I was really impressed because that's not something I'm used to from somebody that I know as, an American. Can you tell me a little bit more about your childhood and what brought you to the German language?
Ooh, so my mother was from Germany. When I was born, my father went to Vietnam. He was American military. And my grandmother from Germany came over to help take care of me. And so from infancy, I was speaking German because she didn't speak any English whatsoever. So I had to, of course, learn German in order to communicate. Some of my first words were German as I was, developing my language skills. And I've always been a very proficient mimic. To me, sound and vibration are essential to transmit deeper wisdoms. That's why I'm such an avid student of Indian classical music with their microtonal systems and of languages themselves. Any spiritual tradition that I've explored, I've wanted to learn the language so that I can more deeply integrate the teachings. I think they're essential to truly understanding the context of language. I truly believe that because ancient wisdoms were channeled and written down or channeled and recorded in whatever way, in not only the context of language, but also the context of time and culture. So for us to assume that we can actually interpret exactly what was being transmitted during that time is, I don't think that's quite possible. But we can translate it into modern day terminologies.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you touch on two different things. On one hand, if you're expressing a thought or a feeling in a different language, it has almost a different meaning. And I can relate to that personally because I speak German fluently, Swiss German. Also, I used to speak French pretty fluently, but that's not that fluent anymore. And Spanish, to a certain degree, I certainly understand a lot of it. And I'm noticing that when people speak in different languages, I feel different things when they express the exact same thing. So there's definitely some power in getting deeper, and especially in those old ancient languages like Sanskrit and Quechuan, or is it called Quechua? Quechua. It's from the Amazon, right? From South America, or?
It's not from the Amazon. It's actually from the Andes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. The Amazon peoples have their own sets of languages.
Yeah. And then the singing, right? You are a musician and a singer. That's really the first time I saw you was singing on stage. And there is so much power in the vibration of the sounds of the music. How did you find to that?
Music both took me into my darkest places. When I was starting out, when I first began my journey into who I am now. And it also brought me back out. When I was very young in school in Germany, I was in bands, rock bands, heavy metal mostly. And I got involved with, all the quotation marks wrong people. And when I came back to the States, that continued and drugs came into the mix. And eventually the music went completely away because it took me into a very dark place. And we'll get more into that in a bit here. Mm-hmm. And then once I began to find my way back, I found kirtan and mantra. And I found that through yoga, asana, and people that I met in those circles. And once I started singing in Sanskrit, singing mantras, those vibrations supported my journey into recovery in a way like nothing had ever touched me before. And through that experience, and then going deeper into raga and the deeper shlokas and verses of the Vedas and the Upanishads and studying Sanskrit, it just opened up a whole new world for me. So, yeah, I think it's really important to be able to transmit those vibrations properly when I'm singing. And that's one of the main reasons I started learning Quechua, is because I now sing medicine music. And I wanted to really be able to not only understand what I was singing, I wanted to be able to write songs in Quechua, which I do now. And I wanted to be able to transmit the deeper meanings with a full consciousness of what I'm actually conveying.
Yeah, what I'm hearing really, music as this ancient technology to help us. What is it that the music does? Or what do you say?
Like I said, music took me first into a very dark place. It can reinforce whatever tendency we're leaning into. So if I'm super depressed and angry and I listen to a bunch of thrash metal, then that's just going to amplify that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So music is an incredible and powerful tool that is a double-edged sword. It can both be like a defense and a wielder of truth, and it can also be a wielder of great damage if we don't use it wisely, like anything, like any utterance that we do, right? Words matter.
That's so fascinating that you're touching on that, because I'm usually thinking of music as something that helps me raise my frequency when I'm down. But of course, it's that double-edged sword, because there's all the different frequencies that can be in the music. And depending on what it is, it can take you to a different place.
Yes.
I wonder if there's some studies on music and frequencies. I'm sure there is. Obviously, there is. That I'm saying it. I'd be curious to see those studies and kind of see which music is at which frequency and get a sense of that and become aware of that more.
Yeah, there definitely are. They're out there. Yeah. It's a deep dive. Definitely. Yeah. And that's not to say that all thrash metal is bad. It's certainly a matter of where I am in the moment and choosing wisely what I'm ingesting vibrationally. Yeah. Yeah.
So you had an exceptional journey with a lot of darkness and a lot of light. And I'm getting goosebumps just saying that. As a matter of fact, I'm noticing my voice is breaking because it's so much. And, knowing you now, it's almost difficult for me to imagine some of the things you had to go through in your life. And maybe let's start in the beginning. And I know you shared that part with me at one point, where you were in school and something happened and you got expelled, and that kind of started you off into a certain direction.
Yeah. I was in school in the United States in junior high school, and I was going to skip school with one friend who had just gotten her learning permit, her driver's permit, and a car. And I got to school, my bus was late. I got to school late, and we were planning on skipping school that day. A whole bunch of the kids were going down to these rapids, and we're going to party that day. And I got to the student parking lot, and she was waiting for me quite nervously because they had had a problem with kids skipping school. And the shop teacher was there, like literally closing the gate as we were heading out. And he was like starting to close the gate. He was walking out with the gate. And instead of stopping, I told her to hit the gas. We nearly ran him over getting out of there. And needless to say, my parents were called immediately, and so were hers. And I got suspended from school. Well, I already knew that this was going to happen. And I also knew, because my father was a very rageful person and had already physically nearly beaten me to, black and blue quite a few times, I didn't want to face that again. Oh. So instead of going home, I had met some bikers through another girlfriend of mine whose mother was involved with them. And I called them up and ran away, like right away.
How old were you at that time?
I was 14 at the time.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. The guy that I hooked up with was, at the time, the national president of the Warlocks, which at that time was the third largest motorcycle group in the nation. Yeah. So, yeah, go big or go home, right? So I hook up with this guy. His name is Butcher. And yeah, I'm sure he's long gone now. He was, I think, in his late 30s at the time. So, yeah. So he got me a fake ID, and I started dancing in a topless club in Florida. And of course, the manager took one look at me. I was a pretty good looking young woman, so young girl at the time. And he just skimmed the fake ID, which was obviously altered, and hired me. So I'm dancing on tables, and one day, a couple months later, after I'd already started selling my body, basically, my mom walks into the club. She had sent a private investigator out to find me. And he found where I was working, and she walked into the club crying and begging me to come home. And of course, once that happened, they had to fire me. And so I went home, and she put me on a plane immediately and sent me to Germany to live with my grandmother and my uncle. And I started going to school in Germany. And being a very bright kid, they put me in gymnasium. And I had only had really speaking level skills in German up to that time. I'd never really been proficient in reading and writing. So it took me a minute to catch up, but I did catch up. And as soon as I caught up, I started getting into bands with my friends and going to the Jugendzentrums, the youth centers, traveling around different youth centers instead of going to school and playing with my band, right?
And let's just say something about Jugendzentrum, because the way I understand it is that's kind of where the outcasts go, right? When they don't want to go to school. Because we had one in our village, and my mom made sure that I do not go there. I wanted to hang out with them, but it's just not on the table for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where I hung. Absolutely. Yeah. I always felt like a misfit. So, I mean, my dad was in the service, so I never lived anywhere longer than 3 years, usually just 1 year at a time. So I was always on the outside looking in. And Germany was a revelation, though. I was like sought after because I was different. I was the American, So I tasted popularity for the first time, and it definitely went to my head. So I skipped school there as well. But over there, as you know, performance matters more than attendance, right? So I made sure that I kept my grades up, which was easy for me, and just barely went to school, just enough to get the next thing that I needed to get under my belt. Yeah. And of course, I started getting passed around from relative to relative because they were fed up to hear, right? After a while. And finally, when I was getting ready to graduate 10th grade, which is, over there, you can end in 10th grade and either go to work or go to a technical or a vocational school, or you can go to 13th grade and go on to university. So as soon as I was ready to graduate 10th grade, they put me on house arrest, locked the phone. I was not allowed anywhere outside of the house after school for the last couple of months. And the day after I graduated, I was put on a plane back to the States. Mm-hmm. So I get on the plane. I'm supposed to land in Miami, take a connecting flight to Orlando. And as soon as I land in Miami, I switched my ticket out for a bus ticket. My parents are waiting at the gate in Orlando for me to get off the plane. And I never appeared.
Oh, wow.
Instead, I called the bikers, told them I was coming back, headed up on the bus to Orlando. And somebody asked me something on the bus ride that I'll never forget. They asked me what I plan to do with my life. And I said something very prophetic. I said, you know what? I'm going to live my life from the gutter to the glitter, and then I'm going to decide where I want to be. And oh boy, like I said, be careful of the words that you speak, because I called that in. I really did call that in. Yeah. So I ended up running around with the bikers for a while until there's so many stories, but he had to beat me up to save face at one point because I got $4,000 ripped off by another of the women involved that I was supposed to hand over to him. And it ended up looking like I was lying, that I didn't have it. And he was like, I don't want to do this. I said, you do what you got to do. But I've always promised myself, after seeing my mom treated like she was by my dad, that I would never allow a man to raise his hand to me. Mm-hmm. And I said, do what you got to do. And he did. And we were on a run up to Alexandria, Virginia. I ripped my property patch off of my vest that I'd just gotten. I was so proud of that. And threw it in his face and walked 5 miles down a dirt road and hitchhiked my way back to Florida. Yeah. And it was kind of great and fun living on the high side of everything for a while I was super young and really beautiful. And I hooked up with this kilo smuggler in Fort Lauderdale for a while. And then when things went south and I had seen too much of what was going on with him and actually had a hit out on me,
wow.
I contacted an agent, a booking agent that I knew, who sent me up to Montreal to start to work on getting my wardrobe for a strip show, for an actual burlesque feature dancer gig. Mm-hmm. And so I danced in Montreal at Le Fidève on Rue Sainte-Catherine, which is the main drag there. But I fell in love with Montreal. Absolutely lived in a recording studio in old Montreal. And just living the high life, really. Anything and everything handed to me at all times. Anything I wanted. I was just living off my looks and my youth, And more and more, that's where I started getting really deep into the drugs too. Started actually injecting cocaine and heroin and started getting its grip on me. So once that started getting too heavy, I moved to Texas, Houston. Oh my God, the height of the oil boom, just dancing there. I had so much money in my G-string. I was just leaving trails of $100 bills on the stage for the next girl to pick up, because there was just too much to stop and grab before the next girl had to be on stage. It was crazy times. It was, just amazing and very alluring. very addictive. And I just went deeper and deeper into my addiction without even realizing what was happening. Yeah, I cleaned up a little bit living at the Texas Renaissance Festival for a few months and then made the trek over to San Diego. And from San Diego to LA. And LA nearly killed me. It nearly swallowed me whole. I hung out with Guns N' Roses, and there's a whole saga on that where somebody had stolen their mixtapes. And my friend and I met the guy on the beach, just random chance. And when I realized what he was talking about, like all this money that he'd just come into, I tricked him into telling me where he had sold the tapes and took the guys out to the place and big, huge wall. They jumped out of my little Fiat and scaled the wall and met the guy that introduced them to the producer that got them their record contract, and the rest is history. I mean, just so many adventures. And yet I was lost. I was completely lost.
Yeah.
It's always seemed like I've been like right on the edge, right on the periphery of all these amazing people's lives and breakthroughs. And yet here I was just stumbling around in the darkness. Yeah.
Wow, what an incredible story. I've never heard your story before. I've known you for a while now, and it gives me goosebumps and puts tears to my eyes to think of you having had to go through all of that. And yet you somehow managed to get through it and grow through it and turn into the amazing, inspiring woman that you are today that I know. I know you lived in the streets for some time, right?
Yeah. So I went back to Montreal after LA, got married, was on the verge of having a really beautiful life with a really beautiful man. Actually then developed my burlesque show. We went cross country, and I was so addicted to smoking cocaine that I let that become more important than him, than the promise of the life that I would have with him, and left him in Vancouver. And as soon as the Canadian authorities realized that I was up there working and no longer married or no longer with my husband, they said I had to come back to this side, to the States. So I landed in Seattle, closest big city to Vancouver, and I hooked up with another big time dealer, a big, huge mixing bowl full of cocaine underneath the bed and flour scoops into pie plates, in the microwave to make big cakes of crack. I mean, and my dragon, my monkey just got huge on my back. And then he got busted and I had nowhere to go. And I had a huge habit that needed to be fed. So I worked for some escort agencies for a while, but even then I just kept spiraling downward and downward and downward, and ended up on the streets of Seattle, literally living under the viaduct.
Wow.
Sleeping in the dumpster behind the Millionaires Club because it was full of the discarded clothing donations and it was warm. Walking Aurora in order to get my next hit. Addicted to crack, addicted to heroin, and drowning.
Yeah, gosh. Yeah. It's an unbelievable story of yours. And again, just thinking of you in the city where we met under such different circumstances than how you do life today. I just have a question about drugs, especially hard drugs. What does that do to you? I always hear drugs help you numb. Numb what? Why? What does it do? How does it feel? I'm just really curious about that.
I was thinking about that this morning. I was also always, as a child, very, very hyper empathetic, very sensitive to maybe intradimensional realities, and always very, oh God, how do I say it? My parents were very disapproving of my explorations into magic, witchcraft, otherworldly realms. When I talked about speaking with spirits, you're speaking with other entities, they got really pissed. And my mother would punish me and tell me I was going to hell. And so it created this cognitive dissonance with what I see now as what was my gifts, and being told that who I truly was inside was wrong and sinful and an abomination. So I think for me, the drugs turned all that off. Although I have to say that anytime my life was truly in danger, and it was many times out there on the streets, there was always something that told me exactly what to say, exactly what to do, exactly how to act, and somehow highlighted everything that I needed to be aware of in order to get me out of the situation. Mm-hmm. So my guides, whatever that was, whatever connection I had, I never completely severed, even with all the hard drug use. Yeah.
That's fascinating to hear. So yeah, you've been this highly empathetic child who wasn't really allowed and encouraged to fully live into that gift of yours. And so that got you onto a different track, and yet it was still always there. And I mean, that's who you are today, and very deeply connected to the intuition and the spiritual and all the magic. There's so much magic around you every time we get to spend time together. It's just magic. I mean, I just love you and love hanging out with you. It's just so magical. And so I'm curious, what was the turning point then? At what point did it go from that darkness to that place where you started becoming more the amazingly light being that you are today? I mean, you've always been a light being. We all are, right? But like really stepping into that and owning it.
Yeah. So I always knew that where I was on the streets with the people that I was surrounded with, I always knew I didn't belong there. No one belongs there, really. And I knew that there was something more. I had studied astrology on Vancouver Island with an astrologer at one point when I was married, when we were still touring. Mm-hmm. And she did my chart, and she told me at the time that my success would come much later. I was about 23 at the time. She said my success would come much later in life. So I always knew that it was going to go one of two ways. Either I was going to die out there in the darkness, or all of the addiction, all of the lifestyle, all of that was just going to fall away. I always had this deep knowing that that was how it was going to shift. And then I had this experience where, oh God, so many sordid tales. This girl kind of kidnapped me at one point. Was going to sell me to her Mexicans for more drugs. And I was tied up in the back of her car. Yeah, literally. And she had forgotten her pipe at the place we were just at. And she thought that I was asleep. It was in a cul-de-sac, this house. And she drove up right up on the front lawn of the place and jumped out, leaving her car running and the door open to go into the house. And I had already wriggled my way out of the restraints, jumped into the front seat. And again, just like back in high school, I went around the whole cul-de-sac. And by the time I got to the exit, one road out, right, she was jumping into the center of the road, and I gunned it and nearly hit her. Right? It's just like high school. And I ran directly to this beautiful man that I had met maybe a month before, who said that he felt some deep connection to me. Mm-hmm. And I called him up and I was like, you need to come get me now. If you feel any kind of deep connection to me, I need your help right now. So he came and got me, took me in. He gave me a place to stay at his best friend's house. At the time, he was dealing, so he provided all the drugs I needed. I didn't have to go out on the street. And then a few months later, his mother, who lived in Fremont, I was up around Greenwood at the time and at his best friend's house, fell and broke her hip. And he came to me and he was like, listen, He goes, I need to move in with my mom and take care of her and nurse her back to health. I want to take you with me. But all this, meaning the drugs and the lifestyle, said, this can't come.
Wow.
And as I'd always known, every time I'd come to a crossroad in my life, that I knew the decision that I made in that moment was going to change the direction of my life irrevocably. I knew in that moment that this choice that I made was going to be the choice between life or death at that point in time. All of a sudden, it just flashed into my consciousness, this ad that I'd been seeing on the back of the Stranger for about 5 years. And the ad said, are you addicted to heroin? Are you depressed? Maybe we can help. Research study at the University of Washington. Call this number.
Wow.
And like the whole ad, just perfect resolution just kind of appeared in my consciousness. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to call this number. So I called and they're like, yeah, you're addicted to heroin. We need to do some tests. We have to about a week's worth of all these psychological tests to determine if you fit our protocols. Right? My husband now, the man who was taking care of me at the time, made sure that I made it to every single appointment on time. And I went through the entire battery of tests. And about 2 weeks later, they called me back and they're like, okay, here's the deal. What we're looking for is people with borderline personality disorder as an underlying condition to heroin addiction. What we found in you is that you do exhibit signs of BPD. However, it is as a result of your drug use, not as an underlying condition. We have 20 people applying, including you, to the last 2 slots that we have open before we close the study. You have shown, though, such motivation to change, and you're the only one who's made it to every single appointment on time. That even though you have just a slight hiccup with what we're looking for, we're going to accept you into the study.
Wow.
So just this is like divine intervention, right? So the study was a double-blind 12-step versus the efficacy of dialectic behavioral therapy, which is based in Zen Buddhist principles with mindfulness as its core component. And I'd done 12-step. I'd done so many 12-step programs, and I worked through the steps, but honestly, in all transparency, I could never get past that first step. I'm not powerless. It works for so many people, and I fully, I'm like, yay for everybody it works for. I couldn't get past. Mm-hmm. I'm not powerless. Mm-hmm. And I already have a higher power on my side. It's like, what am I giving over? I'm already there. So DBT taught me how to empower myself. Now, when they did accept me into the study, it was still a toss-up, 50-50, which slot I was going to get, the 12-step or the DBT. And I got the DBT slot.
Before we continue, I want to take a moment to say thank you for being here and for listening. Your support for this podcast means more than you can imagine. If this conversation is landing for you, I'd love to invite you to go a little deeper with us. You can sign up for the Wake Up Protocol newsletter at thewakeuprotocol.com. That's where we share tools, bonus insights, and discounts on upcoming offerings to help you integrate these conversations into your own life. And if someone comes to mind while you're listening, someone who needs to hear this message right now, please share this episode with them, or even 3 people who feel like they're standing at the edge of something big. This podcast grows through word of mouth, and your sharing truly helps this work reach the people it's meant for. Okay, let's return to the conversation.
Yeah, so I got into the DBT side of the study. Amazing. Again, divine intervention. And they gave us Suboxone for the heroin addiction, but I was still actively using cocaine. And they knew it. I mean, I would disappear during group sessions and my one-on-ones for like 15 minutes into the bathroom and come back all wild-eyed. They knew what was going on. And that wasn't part of their demands, right? That I stop that as well, just the heroin. And the heroin was so easy to stop with the Suboxone. I mean, it took away all the withdrawal symptoms, everything. And the farther along into the study I got, it was a 2-year study, the more it made sense. And it made so much more sense than what I was doing. So I went from using crack every day to every few days to every weekend to every couple of weeks to once a month to once every few months. It just fell away. It was incredible. I started practicing yogasana during that time. And the two, the DBT and the yoga, were so complementary. And everything, it just all resonated, like all of these teachings, the mindfulness, the yoga. And I started getting into the yoga philosophies. I had some really good teachers. And then I started meeting people. The teachers, Jamie Hall was one who invited me to Kirtan, her Kirtan group. And we started going to Kirtan together, and I started singing again, and music came back into my life. And then I started going up to Gina Salah's house and taking harmonium lessons with her. And she introduced me to her Sanskrit Pandit in Varanasi in Benares. And I went to India and I got my yoga teacher YTT certification through Ananda, through East West in California. And then I went to India and got my Ayurvedic therapy practitioner certification. And I got a certification in Sanskrit from Vagishastri in Benares. And then I met... Well, he's Victor now, but at the time, she was Devi, my friend Devi Bhaktananda, who is now Victor Bhaktananda, who introduced me to Sri Tantra, and I got initiated into even deeper knowledge. And I met James Bogue as well, who introduced me to the memorization protocols of learning the different shlokas and the Bhagavad Gita. And I started teaching mantra and yogic philosophies at the Recovery Cafe in Seattle. And through teaching, I deepened my practice even more. And everything just started blossoming. Once I set my feet on the path opened up. And the community poured in to support me. First of all, I could not have done any of this really without the support of someone who believed in me.
Yeah.
And that was my husband, my now husband, who at the time was just someone who was helping me out, I thought. He was desperately in love with me. I had no idea why. When he first told me he loved me, my response was, why? Why? But he saw something in me. And there's a spark within each of us. There really is. That if someone just takes the time to reach out and connect, it can mean life or death. It can mean the world to someone who just needs to be witnessed and needs to be seen, basically.
What an incredible story of turning back to the light and your husband seeing that in you and supporting you through all of that. And then that ad that you saw, I've actually talked with a couple of other people who will be on my podcast in the near future. And they both started their spiritual path because they saw an ad somewhere in a newspaper or on a bulletin board. And
Amazing.
Those synchronicities are just so incredible. Sometimes I wonder if that's just like our guides, our angels that are putting them in the right place at the right time so we know exactly what next step to take. Because in those other stories too, there weren't very many slots open, and yet they got in. You know, it's like that thing that changes everything.
It's divine intervention. I truly believe it with all my heart that that's a thing. It really is a thing. Yeah.
And then finding back to music and to yoga and languages and ancient cultures, which to me just sounds like you finally got connected to the thing you were always interested in that was taken away from you. And because it wasn't there, you just had to fill it with something that was completely not in alignment until something got you back on that path. Yeah. And whenever I think about these types of stories, you know, as souls, I keep coming back to we live in a matrix and we're just one consciousness and we get individuated into these bodies so that our one consciousness soul can evolve. And then we can see each other through individuation, through contrast. And then we come back as a even more evolved version of that soul, that consciousness, which I don't understand, but something bigger. And so that contrast of the dark and the light is so necessary so that we can really see it. You know, I remember when I was a kid and I was sick and my mom took such good care of me and I had everything and it felt so good to be sick for a bit. And then I was like, I'm done being sick. If it's like this all the time, even when I wasn't sick anymore, I'm done being served. I'm done being in this extreme comfort where I get all my needs met, because at some point I needed to get out of bed. I needed to move my body. I needed to do things again that create that contrast again. Too much of either is not going to work. Yours was a long journey. Yeah. So in this podcast, we talk about spiritual awakening. And I always like to have people define what spiritual awakening means to them. How would you define that?
Wow. Yeah, I think it's very different for everybody. For myself, spiritual awakening for me was coming home to myself. It was embracing my shadow. And I've always said that nothing has happened to me in my adult life. I will put that caveat on it. Or in my life once I became responsible for myself. Nothing thereafter happened to me that was not a result of my own actions, either directly or indirectly. So anything I went through, quotation marks, I actually put myself through. I always had choice. I always had agency. Always. Right. And I always knew this. Yet it was when I fully embraced everything that I'd gone through, every iteration of who I had been in the past, and was open to whatever it was I was becoming without attachment to the outcome. To me, that was where I really began waking up. It's that attachment, that grasping, that it's as soon as I didn't know better than what my heart was guiding me into, I could get out of my head and just let my heart lead the way. That's where I started to really feel like, oh, okay, I'm on a path here. And I don't know that I'm so comfortable with thinking I'm all spiritually awakened. Because to me, it is really, like we were talking about earlier before we started, it's very much like this spiraling path where as soon as we complete one level, right, there's more. But wait, there's more, and more to be revealed.
Conversation with somebody about the messy middle, and we continuously have to go through it over and over and over again. And then it's like, what's the beginning, the middle, and the end of that round before we get to that next loop in the spiral?
Right.
Up and up, and can continue for lifetimes. And also, I was just looking at your hand, and you have a snake ring that actually is a spiral. So the metaphor of the snake shedding its skin and the spiral is just that exact metaphor.
And Kundalini Shakti, is this,
The other day, I had a conversation with a friend, and we were talking about how we're in the goo and, in the
imaginal goo.
And she said, I'm actually not thinking of it as the goo. I'm not in the goo. I am shedding my skin as a snake, and I'm continuously growing into the next bigger version, and I'm continuously shedding more of that skin. So that's another metaphor. I love metaphors, and so both the butterfly and the snake.
There we go.
They're powerful metaphors.
Yeah, we're meaning makers. And I think that's also when we find out that we're actually engaging with life, is when we're finding meaning in everything around us. There's nothing wrong with seeing synchronicities and seeing kismets and seeing signs. And that just means that we're paying attention.
And so I'm curious, when you look at yourself before and now, who you are today, and again, on the spectrum, we're continuously evolving, but the before and after of now, what would you say is the biggest shift that happened?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift that's happened probably is my being convinced that I know better, that I know it all, that my way, or the way that I think things should be, is the way, the only way.
Can you say more about that?
God, yeah, that's just what comes to mind, right? I mean, ask me tomorrow and I might have a different answer, but what comes to mind right now is that I was so attached to being right and to always knowing better, and to having the answer, that it got in the way of actually truly learning and truly discovering who I really was.
Where do you think that came from?
I come from a family that's very much like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just what you knew.
It's a generational pattern.
Yeah, just being right is how you are supposed to be. And so deconditioning yourself from that, and then learning that there are other possibilities. For me, it's always about holding curiosity.
Yeah.
Adversity is our strength, holding curiosity and trying to see what else is possible, and then maybe letting some of our beliefs fall away and see if the other version fits us possibly better or not.
Exactly.
And if it doesn't, that's just information. And if it does, again, it's information, and we get to walk closer towards that.
Right. Or maybe we can just integrate bits and pieces that, help to polish off that particular facet of the gem that we're working on.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to come back to the serpent, and you have a retreat center in Washington State called the Serpent Song Sanctuary. And I want to give our listeners a chance to learn what it is that you're offering and how they can find you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So serpentsongsanctuary.com is where you can find me. Serpent Song is an exercise in reciprocity, actually. We're not a business. We work on a donation-based model because I want people who might not have the opportunity otherwise to be able to experience a place of high vibration that is tended and appointed with great care. My entire home is an altar. And I'm very, very diligent about keeping the space energetically clear. And we invite in groups that we host, guest facilitators to come in and bring in their groups. And it's a case-by-case basis what the exchange might be. Yeah, I don't have any set prices or anything like that because it's not a price-based model. We're just trying this out to see if we can work on reciprocity.
Beautiful. We're
on 5 acres on an island in the womb of the Salish Sea, the island of the Heartstone. And it's a powerful vortex here that we've planted our little node into. We've had some really, really juicy, beautiful gatherings here. We have a monthly gathering, interestingly enough, called the Chrysalis Gathering. I had a little inside giggle when you were talking about the imaginal goo.
You do have the chrysalis and the serpent, so you're using all the metaphors.
We are using all the metaphors
right now. Yeah. Well, beautiful. I will make sure to put the link in the show notes so people can find you if they're interested in connecting with you.
Thank you.
Are coming to the end of this.
Okay.
I have one final question, as I have with every guest. If you could go back in time and give a message to a younger version of you, maybe that version that was in Germany, or you pick what age, what would you tell her?
All of this means something. Just wait. It will become clear. Yeah.
Beautiful message. And so it is.
And so it is.
Thank you for your time. Thank you so much for your vulnerability. It brought tears to my eyes just thinking about it now. That's again, hearing your story, the resilience. I hope some people can hear that who are going through something difficult and realize that there is a light at the end of the tunnel and that we can trust that we're being supported and guided. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm not used to talking about myself this much in one go, so I appreciate your time and your witnessing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Wake Up Protocol. If you like what you heard, share this episode with 3 people who need to hear this message. And if you want to go deeper with this work, head to thewakeupprotocol.com and join our email list. That's where this podcast turns into practice. You'll receive tools to help you integrate what you're hearing, bonus resources, and behind-the-scenes insights we only share with our community, along with early access and special invites. If this podcast helps you feel less alone and more like yourself, the newsletter is where we continue the conversation. And if this is the last thing you hear from us, all we'd like to say is keep going, trust yourself, follow your heart. Until next time, have a safe and happy journey.